All right, hello and welcome to my talk for Cal Lutheran's Homecoming 2021. This talk is about mobile money benefits and usage in the case of M-Pesa. I'm Chris Njunge, Assistant Professor of Organizational Leadership in the School of Continuing and Professional Studies here at Cal Lutheran, and welcome to this conversation. During this talk, I will be defining some of the terms that will be coming up later in the discussion, providing a bit of background around M-Pesa. And by the way, M-Pesa, Pesa is a Swahili word for money. And so the phrase M-Pesa refers to mobile money. So look a little bit at the business model and how it works, look at some of the levels of impact that M-Pesa has had, look at some of the milestones of its expansion to date, and growth, and then just conclude with a few reflections at the end. So some of the terms, and excuse me, I've included some background pictures here. The last one was from Amboseli looking at Mount Kilimanjaro. This one is in the Masai Mara, just a beautiful landscape in the back. But back to the definition of terms. Mobile payments refer to payments made in exchange of goods or services using mobile money. And when we talk about money transfer, it's not necessarily for payments of goods and doesn't necessarily mean that a phone is involved. So transfers could include Western Union or other ways that money is transferred. And finally, mobile money is a term used broadly to refer to money transactions where a mobile phone is involved. And in these days of Zelle and Venmo, some of this may seem obvious, but in 2007, when M-Pesa was getting started in Kenya, none of this existed in many parts of the world. And in many ways, Kenya and Safaricom, the company that runs and owns M-Pesa, were pioneers in this space. And this discussion kind of just reflects on some of the impacts that have happened with M-Pesa. So in terms of background, as I mentioned, M-Pesa came into being around 2007, and the situation that existed here, there's an example just citing the case of obstacles facing banking for the world's poor. In this case, it's a case of India. It could be anywhere in the world. And this was definitely the case in Kenya. And so there are limited options if you earned even, say, $20 in terms of how you would keep that value or store that value and keep it secure. So whether you would, say, purchase an item of livestock that when you'd keep with you, or you'd send it to a relative so they keep safeguard that for you, or under your mattress, or try then and go for formal banking. And one of the big barriers at that time, and in many ways still, is that financial institutions did not really include many of the world's poor. There were high thresholds for people to be able to open a bank account and save, and many people just could not afford the deposits that were required. And so in came M-Pesa, and the idea for M-Pesa came from an employee at Vodafone who went into a competition to do something to improve financial inclusion. And the initial idea was actually about microfinance, and it didn't work as well. But as they observed users of mobile phones in Kenya, they were able to appreciate and understand how they were using their cell phones on a person-to-person basis. And in response to this, then they wound up creating what turned out to be M-Pesa. So essentially how it works, and I'll talk about this in this slide and the next one, is that to register, you need to have a mobile phone subscription with a local phone company. In that case, it's Safaricom, and an identity card, an ID of some kind. Then once you register, you get basically an e-money account, and you get a menu on your cell phone that shows you how much e-money you have. So to deposit money, you hand over the cash to an agent. The agent credits your account, and you now have e-money on your phone that you could use to buy stuff, or you could transfer to other people. And so this was a big deal in terms of access, enabling financial inclusion and access to many people who were not included in the financial services. Behind here is a background of Nairobi, Kenya, near the National Park, and Kenyatta Conference Center is at the background there. So just highlighting how M-Pesa works, you have two users on either side of this diagram and two agents below them. So essentially, if a customer wants to send money to another, they deposit money to an agent and get e-money. And then they send that money to the other person, who then goes to the other agent, the agent who's closest to them, and deposits the e-money and gets cash in return. And so the agents are an integral part of how M-Pesa works. And at the very beginning, even before the concept was completely proved out, the company, Safaricom, spent close to $10 million at the time, which was a huge undertaking, but it was an essential part of making the service available everywhere and making it somewhat ubiquitous. So anywhere you go now, really in Kenya, you'll see an M-Pesa agent practically anywhere and everywhere that you go. It's broadly accepted. And in fact, I remember one time I had gone to visit Masai Mara, and one of the park rangers walked up to me and just said, "Hey, can I give you cash and you give me some e-money, or send me some e-money to send to someone else?" And I was confused because I wasn't used to it. And I wound up calling a friend of mine to talk to him, and they actually completed the transaction right there and then. So seeing it firsthand was really powerful, that even when you're in the middle of Masai Mara where there's wildlife, a transaction like this, people have so much trust in the system and the way it works, and someone could send money to someone on the other side of the country completely. M-Pesa also allows for transactions within countries now, or between countries. So if someone is in, even here in the US, they can integrate through a card, whether your Visa or your bank account, and send money directly to M-Pesa. I'll move on now to the next part. In terms of M-Pesa's business model, initially, M-Pesa was designed as a person-to-person mobile money transfer system, but has now evolved to include person-to-business transactions, where people could pay for their utility bills and the like, and pay at restaurants. Transaction really, in almost every case, businesses accept M-Pesa. Also, business-to-business transactions now are allowed for M-Pesa payments. Then the impacts, for me, is one of the biggest things when we think of M-Pesa. At the very beginning, as we were talking about, the barriers, the impacts starting at the bottom here, the individual level, are probably the clearest ones and most obvious ones, that, added security, accessibility, convenience, timeliness have been a huge benefit for individuals at an individual level. But also at an organizational level, organizations don't necessarily have to build out their own business or technological infrastructure. They can build on top of M-Pesa and enable many, many transactions that were previously not possible. For instance, logistics, and sometimes what's referred to as the last mile, have been a big issue in many developing economies. But now, increasingly, there are logistics companies coming up. Motorcycles are fairly ubiquitous within Kenya and many emerging markets, and many of these companies are operating simply using mobile phones and using M-Pesa, so that people can book riders and send money, pay for the parcel deliveries in a very quick and convenient way. At a societal level, the socioeconomic well-being of people is better. People are able to get jobs. People are able to transfer value, create businesses quickly. I had an interesting story in the streets of Nairobi. I was walking by, and there was a bookseller. And so I wanted to buy a book. And this was just a stand outside on the street. And I asked for where the bookseller was, and he wasn't there. There was a security guard. And the security guard communicated with the bookseller, and we agreed on a price, and he had his mobile payment number on there. And I paid for the book, I think it was $5, without ever seeing the bookseller. So it's enabling businesses to develop in many ways. So as I conclude here, since 2007, M-Pesa has grown to 50 million active users, which is a huge number in terms of technology diffusion. There's a variety of products now, including savings on loan, not just payments. And then there's a significant impact on GDP. I think upwards of 6% of GDP comes from M-Pesa transactions. And Safaricom is one of the top employers in the region. And some of the activities include an innovation fund, many customer service, not customer service, but rather CSR, giving back to the community projects by Safaricom enable students to have access to education and the like. So really, in conclusion, as we look at a backdrop of Nairobi here, that at Cal Lutheran, we're talking about, leaders developing with a global perspective and making an impact, not just where we are. And M-Pesa is an example of how an idea that someone has in a different part of the world can grow into something that's really practically applicable and impactful and have a huge changing impact on the society at a societal level, at an organizational level, and at an individual level. So thank you for listening. Hope you take some time to find out more about M-Pesa, and thank you very much.